Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Just to, we are live on YouTube channel now.
Mhm.
So I think in maybe 3 minutes, we can start.
Okay. Okay.
Okay?
All right.
Okay.
You are the boss.
No. I
Yeah.
wish, but
You're the boss. You're the boss.
Dr. Marcelo Figueiredo.
Figueiredo. Yes. Yes. That's right. Yes.
Figueiredo.
Yes.
I apologize if I am
No
making
problem.
any mistakes.
No problem. No problem. No problem.
Professor, the voice from your microphone is very low.
Yes, now it's better. Yes,
Now it's better, yes.
I'm just putting it to hear you. Then I took it off.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So, Professor, you are in Italian now, are you in Italy or in India?
I'm in India right now.
Okay.
oh,
I'm in India and I came at the end of April. So I came when the wave was rising.
Oh, okay.
And me and my wife, we became a bit sick also. Though for the rapid test, we were tested negative, but we were sick nevertheless. So we don't know. We got well. So
yeah.
Good.
fingers
Yeah.
crossed.
Good.
It has been, I think, in this again. I feel we are both similarly placed, both India and Brazil, where we both, I think, should pay more attention to public health.
Oh, yes, sure. Yes. You took the vaccine. You took
Yeah.
you took
Did
the
you?
you took the vaccine in India or in
I
Italy?
I can't hear you, Professor.
Oh, okay. So
Did you took the
You
vaccine?
you took the vaccine in
In
Italy or
India,
in
not yet, but I have registered. I will be taking it.
Okay.
Because, you know, in case you had some infection, you shouldn't take it for 2 months or so, right? So after that, we will take it, because for my wife it was a bit more severe. There were patches shown on her lungs, so it was, which is why we are waiting for some time.
So I think if everybody is ready,
So is it a good
we
view?
can start.
Is it a good view for? Is it a
Yes,
good view
it's
for
perfect.
YouTube?
Perfect.
Okay.
So can I start? Everybody's ready?
Yes.
Let's begin.
yes.
So first, I will give the opening remarks in Portuguese and after in English. And then, Professor Pratyush, you can start your presentation, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
So, vamos lá, vou começar. Olá, sejam bem-vindos a mais um DDES, Diálogos sobre o Desenvolvimento, Empresa e Sociedade, projeto coordenado pela professora Mariana Ribeiro Santiago. Eu acho que vocês já notaram que a abertura de hoje ela está um pouquinho diferente, né? A professora Mariana ela teve um problema de agenda e assim ela me honrou com um convite para poder moderar este evento. Para aqueles que não me conhecem, meu nome é Jaqueline Zanetoni, eu sou egressa do PPGD Unimar e professora da Universidade de Mogi das Cruzes. Eu gostaria de dizer que é um prazer estar aqui com vocês e aprender com os convidados de hoje, que são referências na temática do direito constitucional. Assim, mesmo que em português, eu cumprimento o professor Pratyush Kumar, que retorna à Universidade de Marília, ainda que virtualmente, e o professor Marcelo Figueiredo, que já é um parceiro aqui do nosso PPGD. Eu cumprimento a Ana Clara, ela é mestranda do programa, orientanda da professora Mariana e está nos auxiliando aqui neste evento de hoje. Eu preciso também parabenizar a professora Mariana pelo trabalho incansável à frente deste projeto, o qual vem promovendo de fato a internacionalização do programa, sempre com convidados de altíssimo nível e debatendo aí os mais diversos temas relacionados ao mundo do direito. Eu gostaria de agradecer novamente à professora Mariana pela oportunidade, a confiança e o convite. Em nome da professora Mariana, eu também gostaria de agradecer os apoiadores deste projeto, o Instituto Internacional de Direito, em nome da professora Maria Helena Diniz, a Universidade Federal do Mato Grosso do Sul, a UFMS, e a Escola Superior de Advocacia. E, obviamente, que eu vou ter que fazer o papel de YouTube aqui hoje, então eu gostaria de pedir que vocês sigam o canal, curtam este vídeo e cliquem no sininho. Esse apoio e engajamento é super importante para o programa, até para que esses eventos continuem sendo realizados sempre de forma aberta ao público em geral, totalmente gratuitos e com emissão de certificação. Bom, agora eu vou falar em inglês para dar boas-vindas ao nosso convidado e para que ele possa iniciar os nossos trabalhos no dia de hoje. Hello, everyone. My name is Jaqueline Zanetoni, and I'm a professor at University of Mogi das Cruzes and alumni of the postgraduate program of University of Marília. Unfortunately, Professor Mariana is not able to greet everyone today, but in any case, I want to congratulate her for the outstanding work that she's developing in this project. I want to salute and give a huge welcome to Professor Pratyush Kumar from University of Eastern Piedmont in Italy and Professor Marcelo Figueiredo from PUC São Paulo, who are going to debate the Gandhian Constitutionalism. I'm looking forward to learn about this interesting topic, and certainly we will have a great lecture today. So, Professor Pratyush, thank you very much for accepting the invitation, and you have the floor.
A very warm evening and a very warm morning to everyone here. I would like to thank Professor Mariana Ribeiro Santiago for having me once again. It's a pity that she's not here today to join the discussion. But I'm thankful to Dr. Jaqueline Zanetoni, nevertheless, to be able to moderate the program for us, and for Dr. Marcelo Figueiredo, an eminent constitutionalist, to join in the debate. So I am presenting on Gandhian Constitutionalism today. Kant, in his Perpetual Peace, wrote that a moral politician is someone who does not subject morals to the demands of politics. Instead, he interprets the principles of political action in a way that allows them to coexist with morals. And in my own humble understanding, I feel that the most fit case in contemporary history is Gandhi. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, that is his full name, and he's also called the Mahatma. It's a Sanskrit Hindi word. Mahatma means a great soul. So, but as the problem goes with exceptional actors whoever came into human history, is that we turn them into great souls, so that then there is a convenient escape for the rest of society and the political world to say that, oh, he's so exceptional, so he could do it. and we are just ordinary people, so there's no need for us to emulate. That's often the problem. So we just put them on the walls, on the notes, in courtrooms. But so we turn them into a symbol, into a myth. So in terms of the myth of modern India, Gandhi also, he is a Mahatma, but at the same time, because he has been turned into a Mahatma, that people find that, that there is no, emulating him is beyond their human means, which is not the case. He is, at the end of the day, a human, an exceptional one, but a human being nevertheless. And in his times, if we compare, we can see from the East, we can start in terms of comparing the kind of political leaders as statesmen leading the society. There were many sterling individuals like Tolstoy and Romeo Roland and so many others, but they were not leading their societies as statesmen, which Gandhi was. But if we see from East, Hirohito, Mao, Lenin, Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, Franco, Salazar, and even Churchill, I don't think there is a match in terms of political leadership. For someone leading, 330, 350 million people of the Indian subcontinent, as the most important, as the most prominent political leader, statesman, I'm afraid I do not get a comparable match. Later on, we do, in the image of Gandhi, we see Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela. But during his times, it is an unfortunate history of mankind, I would say, that we don't see other statesmen like him. Anyways, this is in terms of a bit of also a bit, as an Indian, it can be a bit of self-gratifying also to talk about the greatness of Gandhi. So Gandhi was a very astute politician, and he was as a draftsman, as a legal draftsman, he was exceptional. While when he started, after doing his bar at law in England at Lincoln's Inn, when he returned to India, he tried his luck in Bombay, but he couldn't succeed. So he went to South Africa on a brief, and he became a very successful lawyer. I don't have the exact statistics, but in terms of all the colored coolie barristers, perhaps he was the most successful one as a colored person in a very racist South Africa. In fact, in the neighborhood in which he lived, well, he was the only non-white living in that neighborhood. And he almost used to earn 5,000 pounds annually, which is an exceptional amount for the late 19th century. So it's not that he was not a successful lawyer, so to say. So, but his forte, the moment he in his South African experience, the conditions of his fellow Indians really appalled him. And he himself had to face a lot of racist discriminations. Like once he was thrown, one of the famous incidents of having been thrown from the train on the Pietermaritzburg railway station. So Gandhian ideas and practice of constitutionalism were gradual and incremental, starting from his South African experience. He went to South Africa as a briefless barrister in 1893 to resolve a business dispute with his business dispute coupled with a family feud, instead of a prolonged litigation and bleeding his client of resources as a constant source of employment, Gandhi forced a compromise through arbitration. Not just was the legal dispute resolved, but also the relations between the families reinstated. He kept resolving disputes at a fraction of the cost for Indian businessmen, most of whom were Muslims or Parsis, but he made truth as a necessary precondition for his clients. Truth as a defense for mitigation of punishment or reduction in sentence was used by Gandhi. He would encourage his clients to undergo punishment in case they had committed a crime, and he as a lawyer would successfully use truth to reduce punishment if a client held truth from him. And when Gandhi would get to know of it, he would put it on record to the magistrate, upholding the principle of a lawyer as a judge of the first recourse, more specifically in a common law setup, but also in civil law. In this manner, his reputation and esteem increased among the judges, and contrary to speculation, his practice increased manifold. And perhaps he was among the more successful colored coolie barrister in colonial South Africa in the 19th and early years of 20th century. This kind of legal practice is unique and principled in an adversarial justice of common law system. And in this early phase, Gandhi sincerely, like most other moderate Indian leaders of that era, late 19th, early 20th century, he sincerely believed in being a citizen and not a mere subject of the empire, of the British Empire. He suffered racial prejudice and violence himself and witnessed the differentiated, prejudicial, and discriminatory legal system under which, notwithstanding their poverty, the hard-working, law-abiding, and honest indentured Indian workers worked. Now, not just facts and practice, but the laws themselves were in variance to the evolving British constitutionalism over which their imperial machinery prided themselves on. The so-called greatness of British legal system based upon representative government and the much touted rule of law lay exposed. Because the idea came from the utilitarian principles as espoused by Bentham and then J.S. Mill in his representative government, where he wrote that the representative government as an ideally best polity, as he called it, was not suited to all peoples. Only those capable of fulfilling its conditions, he argued, were entitled to enjoy the benefits of representative government. For the rest, subjection to foreign force and a government in a considerable degree despotic was appropriate and even necessary. So this was like the white man's burden to come and teach representative government to the rest of the world. Now, as a lawyer and as a constitutionalist, the constitution, when he returned to India, the constitution of Congress Party of 1920 was almost single-handedly drafted by him. And it was not done alone. He took consultation and he included all the leading members of the Congress, of the then Indian National Congress into account. And he kept them updated on how he was drafting and what he was drafting. And he prided himself and he regarded it as his real entrance into Congress politics, his drafting of the Constitution of Indian National Congress. So he was very much part of the constitutional process. We see him as a political, moral, or even a religious figure, but not in terms of a lawyer, a constitutionalist. Where, getting back to Professor Peter Haverley, when he speaks of the political process, that the political process is not removed from the Constitution. but in fact an integral part of its life and functional sphere, a heart in the truest sense of the word, akin to a pump. It achieves movement, innovations, changes, but also affirmations that form more than mere objective material for later constitutional interpretation. They are a part of constitutional interpretation because within their framework, public realities are created and noticeably changed. The discretion afforded to the legislator as a constitutional interpreter may qualitatively differ from the leeway of a constitutional judge in the interpretation process, as the discretion is limited in an entirely different way. But this does not inevitably equate to a significant qualitative difference. The political process is not a constitution-free zone. It pre-formulates topics, sets developments into motion which remain constitutionally relevant, even where a constitutional judicial interpreter later holds that the legislature is charged to settle this question within the boundaries of constitutional alternatives. So we see that the whole political processes that Gandhi unleashed from the late 1910s, when his first movement was the Champaran Satyagraha of 1918 in my state of Bihar, where I come from. So he unleashed from the late 1910s. It is these political processes which created a sense of constitutionalism, which predates the drafting of the constitution itself. Because after all those who drafted India's constitution between 1946 to 1950 through the Constituent Assembly of India, they were all, most of them were either Gandhi, as fellow travelers or as followers or as admirers of Gandhi. Even some adversaries were included. Some adversaries or, some admirers of the British rule were also included, but that's also a very Gandhian method where he wouldn't exclude. When he said that I do not hate the British, I hate British policies. So this was again a very Gandhian constitutional methodology of involving all the disparate elements to create the constitution. But the processes, the political processes were unleashed by Gandhi from the late 1910s as the most important figure. There were many other figures in the Indian national movement of freedom from British rule. And they all had their role to play. This is not to discount the fact that they did not have anything to offer. But one has to understand that it is Gandhi who was at the peak, and it was Gandhi who had the largest following, irrespective of region, religion, caste, creed, so on and so forth. So many differences. I mean, India has 400 languages and 3,000 dialects and so on and so forth. There are many language families. All the 6 major religions are present. There's so many diversities that it is only someone of Gandhi's caliber and of Gandhi's foresight who could have led a platform of the Indian National Congress towards India's freedom. And it was also like the Indian National Congress, it did not really work as a very exclusive party. Everybody was part of it, the socialists, the communists, some Hindu Mahasabhaites. There were people from different other political persuasions also. Even many Muslim leaguers were also members of the Indian National Congress simultaneously. So Indian National Congress was like a one size fits all for all, and it was Gandhi who was leading it, and it was he who framed its constitution. After all, we often discount this fact that that the very nucleus of functioning of Indian National Congress, when it became a mass organization from the 1920s, when he started the non-cooperation movement, 1920-22, that it is Gandhi's doing. Anyways, getting back to the text, looking at the Champaran Satyagraha in India, the first successful Satyagraha was in Champaran in Bihar in 1918. Essentially, the Champaran Satyagraha was a very constitutional act of recording the grievances of poor farmers who were forced to plant indigo by the British indigo planters through an oppressive legal regime, which ultimately led to their abject conditions. This was very different from the Satyagraha movements of non-cooperation or civil disobedience, which were to come in years and decades ahead. The Jallianwala Bagh massacre had not happened, and Gandhi still believed that the British would live up to their constitutional ideals and bring reforms, democratic representation, and give dominion status to India like the settler colonies of Canada, Australia, or even South Africa. It is also noticeable that all the moderate leaders, they were seeking dominion status, where they should have a representative, democratic, liberal government. But liberalism itself, in the form of J.S. Mill and others, was discriminatory at that point of time. And so they wanted a dominion status, which was given to settler colonies of Canada and Australia, but not to India. That also is a difference, because if there was a representative government in India, it would be Indians who would be represented. Whereas in these settler colonies, it would be the image of the white Englishman again, having the representative government. So they were scared that if we don't give dominion status to Canada and Australia, they might also revolt like the Americans did in 1776. So there are many layers and multiple reasons for making these decisions, but at the core of it was this racist colonial project. Gandhi writes, the Champaran tenant was bound by law to plant 3 out of every 20 parts of his land with indigo for his landlord. This system was known as the Tinkachia system, as 3 kattas out of 20, which make 1 acre, had to be planted with indigo. And once you plant indigo, the land becomes infertile and you cannot really grow crops on it for the next 3-4 years. This is during that time, 19th century, I'm talking late 19th, early 20th century. So, and each time, if they had to, like 3/20th of their land, if the farmers had to plant indigo, their whole land would end up becoming barren, because every year they had to do it. They had to plant indigo as per the diktats of the indigo planters, most of whom were British planters, because they wanted to set up the same kind of plantation system of indigo in North Bihar, like they did for plantation of rubber in Malaysia, for example, or tea in Northeast India, in Assam, for example. So, which also had a lot of environmental consequences. That's a whole different area. Even this constitutional exercise of recording the grievances of poor peasants met with stiff opposition and threats of violence. A notice was served against Gandhiji under section 144 of the Criminal Procedure Code to leave Champaran, to which he replied he did not propose to comply with it and leave till his inquiry was finished. He received summons for trial the very next day for disobeying the order to leave Champaran. He pleaded guilty and in his brief statement read, with the permission of the court, I would like to make a brief statement showing why I have taken the very serious step of seemingly disobeying the order passed under section 144 of CRPC. In my humble opinion, It is a question of difference of opinion between the local administration and myself. I have entered the country with motives of rendering humanitarian and national service. I have done so in response to a pressing invitation to come and help the ryots. Ryots means tenant farmers, who urge they are not being fairly treated by the indigo planters. I could not render any help without studying the problem. I have therefore come to study it with the assistance, if possible, of the administration and the planters. I have no other motive, and I cannot believe that my coming can in any way disturb public peace and cause loss of life. As a law-abiding citizen, my first instinct would be, as it was, to obey the order served upon me. But I could not do so without doing violence to my sense of duty to those for whom I have come. It is my firm belief that in the complex constitution under which we are living, the only safe and honorable course for a self-respecting man is, in the circumstances such as face me, to do what I have decided to do. That is, to submit without protest to the penalty of disobedience. I venture to make this statement not in any way in extenuation of the penalty to be awarded against me, but to show that I have disregarded the order served upon me, not for want of respect for lawful authority, but in obedience to the higher law of our being, the voice of conscience. So the judgment was postponed because the government wanted to avoid any kind of civil unrest. So it is a classic case of a disciplined constitutional legal way of non-violent civil disobedience. The Lieutenant Governor of the state of Bihar, Sir Edward Gate, took a prudent decision for the case to be withdrawn against Gandhiji, even before he could appear before the magistrate the next time. Otherwise, it would have led to a huge unrest in the region. Subsequently, the collector, who is a government administrative authority in the district, wrote to him saying that he was at liberty to conduct the proposed inquiry and that he could count on whatever help he needed from the officials. Gandhi examined 7,000 peasant tenants, and the entire compendium of testimonies are now being edited in 8 volumes by one of contemporary Gandhian scholars. So this is a classic case of how, but at this point of time, he still believed that good sense would prevail and the British would give dominion status and representative government and would concede to the legitimate demands of Indian national leaders. But that didn't happen. In fact, during the First World War, there were other national leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Annie Besant who started a Home Rule League movement. So, and Gandhi did not join because he said that that I knew the difference of status between an Indian and an Englishman, but I did not believe that we had been quite reduced to slavery. I felt then that it was more the fault of individual officials than of the British system, and that we could convert them by love. If we would improve our status through the help and cooperation of the British, it was our duty to win their help by standing by them in their hour of need. So he thought that if we stood by them in their hour of need, which was the First World War, that there might be a change of heart and they would understand that and appreciate the legitimate demands of Indian national movement. But that history would show that at this point in time, Gandhi's hope and expectation of the British was a bit naive. Contrary to expectations of constitutional government on democratic representation after the war, the true color of the British administration became clear when it proposed more repressive legislation with the Rowlatt bills on various subjects, later turned into an act extending wartime repression of civil liberties. One of the bills provided for trials without right of appeal by special courts in camera for demanding security from persons likely to commit offenses and for arrests on mere suspicion. The other bill was intended to introduce permanent, excuse me, permanent changes in the ordinary criminal law and to make even the possession of a seditious document punishable with 2 years' imprisonment. This was in addition to other repressive legislations already in place, like the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1908, the Press Act of 1910, and the Defense of India Act of 1915. Now, against this Rowlatt Act, Rowlatt was the British official who had framed the act. So there were a series of acts and it was named after him. There was a peaceful procession, including women and children, at an enclosed park with just one small entrance called Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar. British Brigadier General Reginald Dyer, without any provocation or warning, ordered his soldiers to shoot 1,650 rounds at an unarmed gathering in Jallianwala Bagh on April 13, 1919, killing 379 people, including women and children, and injuring 1,200 according to official figures, while unofficial figures, including that of the Indian National Congress Inquiry Committee, put the figure of at least 1,000 dead. This was a new low in the criminality and brute violence of British colonialism, for which the British government or the Crown has not officially apologized so far. So we see how this becomes the turning point, where not just Gandhi, most leaders, they understood that constitutional mendicancy will not work. So there has to be a non-violent civil disobedience. And also one has to understand there were revolts against the British all throughout their presence in India, all across the subcontinent. There were many revolts, there were many revolutionary organizations. My grandfather was also part of, initially in his youth, part of a revolutionary organization against the British. But the policy program and ideology was not sustainable. The British had immense power, immense force. They would crush with impunity, which they did after the First War of Indian Independence in 1857. They crushed with impunity. They crushed all the different tribal revolts in Eastern India. They killed everyone. And there was a sannyasi are ascetics who started a movement against the British. It continued for 100 years almost. Sannyasi revolt, but they killed with impunity. So Gandhi knew that no amount of violence, of force. So it's also, we have to understand that he's an astute politician. He could assess the strength of his adversary. And what he did, what is most remarkable in Gandhian political process, is that he made his opponent feel ashamed of himself, of his own act, that how inhuman, how despite being a master, is so is such a poor figure in front of Gandhi, that, you know, thin, lanky, short man, they are just he became that's the invincibility of truth. Of course, this can function only, which we see later, which I've written in the article, that how you need, for truth, And you need also evidence. You need social presence, which Martin Buber wrote. If Gandhi were in the Nazi regime, he would have been shot dead, he and his followers, before they could emerge, before anyone would know about them. Which is why many peace activists and great admirers of Gandhi also told that given an opportunity, they would assassinate Hitler because it would save a lot of lives. So we have to understand that there wasn't freedom of press as we understand in constitutional democracy, liberal constitutional democracies today, or at least so far as we know, that there is freedom of press. But during British rule, there was press and there were restrictions. So had there not been a press, a freedom of press, in that sense, Gandhian political process is also very much hinged upon freedom of press. So freedom of press, free movement of people, association, all these are part of the Gandhian political processes, which then of course crept into when the fundamental rights in 1930-31 in the Congress session, it was so all these rights were many of the fundamental rights which found their way into the Constitution of India were framed during the colonial period and based on their experience. So now on the concept of Swaraj, Hind Swaraj and parliamentary Swaraj, this is Swaraj literally means self-rule. Swaraj is a Hindi word which was used by Gandhi. The rule of the self, or the rule over the self, both the subject and the object of the rule, Raj, is the self, Swa. Other prominent synonyms of Swaraj like Swadhinta, literally the state of being under one's own control, and Swatantrata, literally the state of being in charge of oneself, and its close relative Swadeshi, literally indigenous, belonging to one's own country, tellingly share the reflexive particle swa that points back to the speaker, positing a self to whom this sovereignty belongs and over whom this sovereignty is exercised. So this again is a very important lesson in Gandhian politics and Gandhian political process. Is he always paid emphasis on his actions first. So all financial records of all the ashrams and all the in any capacity that was given to him, he was a meticulous recorder, and there was nothing hidden. It was all transparent. It's also remarkable that ever since he took to public life in South Africa, no aspect of, he did not have any private life. Everything, or every aspect of his life was open to public view, and some of which now has led to a lot of, reassessment, and in our contemporary times they come across as a bit odd also, some of his actions. But that's another remarkable feature of how a politician, a moral politician must behave, that no aspect of his life should be hidden, which might affect his public policies. And so in this sense, Gandhi as an antidote to the ultra-left idea where public and private is diminished, he is a supreme example. I don't know of a communist politician who has diminished the public and private, but Gandhi did. So he in that sense is also an antidote, that there is nothing private in Gandhi. Everything is public. So, and such a meticulous recorder of everything, every event, every single penny, and so frugal. This is we just got the report yesterday that the Arctic ice cover, we have reached a point of no return. So he has great relevance in constitutional environmentalism, to live frugally, because he said needs can be fulfilled, greed can never be fulfilled. So the modern consumerist world works, it caters to human greed, of an unending desire to acquire. And of course, Gandhi is an antidote to that, without being a so-called classical left. So that also leaves room for liberal constitutional values, where there's Swaraj, there's freedom to choose. It's not a party diktat. You're free to make the choice. This enlightened, reasoned choice, which he emphasized upon. So he did mention in his 1909 tract of Hind Swaraj, which was quite revolutionary. I don't think we have the time to go into the details of Hind Swaraj, but many of its ideas were quite to overturn the Western industrial, modernist Western industrial economy and its impact on society. It was to overturn everything. So it is quite, in just 20 chapters, a small tract. It is quite remarkable in its long-lasting relevance, intellectual relevance at least, if we are not able to implement all that he really wanted there. But he emphasized, he moderated in terms of the practicality that we need parliamentary Swaraj. Hind Swaraj resonated through his works, but he said that we need parliamentary Swaraj, and parliamentary Swaraj meant constitutional democracy and a constituent assembly to frame and draft the Constitution of India. Now, as another project, in terms of rights, we see right to freedom of press, right to free movement, right to association. These are all Gandhian political processes. And while trying to compare with the Italian constitutional ideas, I found two ideas which really resonated, and they can be seen to be relevant in terms of their comparison of meekness or mitezza and mercy. These are two Italian constitutional ideas which can be used to understand Gandhi. If we want an Italian Gandhi, it has to be with meekness and mercy. And I find that there it's my own reading and my own understanding that Article 1 of Italian Constitution, which speaks of fondata sul lavoro, founded on work, the Italian Republic, Democratic Republic founded on work, is because Gandhi also emphasized a lot on work. In all his ashrams, everybody was meant to work, and work physically also. So it is not just intellectual labor, but also physical labor, because he knew that whether we like it or not, the way the world moved and the way the modern world was moving, he knew that intellectual labor would always have a sense of, in the hierarchical frame, would be higher than physical, or would be considered higher than physical labor, which is why he emphasized a lot on physical labor. And he put them on the same pedestal, that physical labor is also equal to intellectual labor, but that whether it is or it is not, that can be disputed. But what is not in dispute is the dignity of labor itself. So labor as a concept, I find that there can be more, which I did not do in the article, that can be done, is how Article 1 of Italian Constitution can be read in Gandhian framework, where it is founded on work. And it is told work, not intellectual work or not physical work, but work itself. So it's dignity of work, it's dignity of labor. Now, on his in meekness, in the Italian context, there was a debate between two leading Italian thinkers, Norberto Bobbio, who is a liberal constitutionalist, and Giuliano Pontara. I had the good fortune to meet Giuliano Pontara. I thought he had accompanied Bobbio, but he's still with us because Bobbio left us in 2005. So it was like, you know, a eureka moment to see him present in the conference, and he was kind enough to join when I presented my paper, and I got some very good feedback from him. So in terms of the meekness, the difference between the two thinkers was on the very definition of politics, where Bobbio emphasized in a very Machiavellian sense that politics is based on power, on strength, whereas Pontara emphasized that it is not just strength, but also morality, which is part of a meek individual. So and Pontara writes very passionately on Gandhian politics of nonviolence, and I was quite dumbstruck at how well he understood. Of course, anyone can, but when I had read, I was very pleased at how well he has encapsulated the Gandhian politics of nonviolence. Nonviolence, on the other hand, Bobbio, though he mentions that he is aware of Gandhian politics and writings, I have not found in his references. This also has a post-colonial moment, that how much of the non-global North literature is actually referred to by, even if Gandhi is not referred, then I cannot expect other writers or intellectuals to be referred. And that this also requires change in terms of when we speak of migration of constitutional ideas or comparative constitutionalism, then even review of literature has to take into account mere knowledge or literacy is not enough, but one has to, in terms of comparison, has to take into account all the relevant material. And there is a huge corpus of literature. Gandhian works are themselves in 100 volumes, and there are innumerable number of works on Gandhi which come every year. So that was one disappointment, but there's also the brighter side of the picture, that the debate is on meekness and it's centered on the Gandhian politics of nonviolence between the two thinkers. So Pontara writes that nonviolence has a role in politics, which is as effective as were Gandhi's presence and the role he played in politics, but it is within politics in an altogether special way, and in this consists the real novelty and currency of the Gandhian message. Because he is meek, a non-violent person does not engage in conflictual relations with others, aiming to contest, destroy, or defeat. He is not vindictive. He does not bear grudges. He does not hold resentment or hate towards anyone, and he is not power hungry. He's certainly never the first to start a quarrel, but he is not afraid to engage in a conflict. Rather, he is not fearful of bringing latent conflicts to the surface, nor is he frightened of struggle. But in the same way as he rejects violence, he also rejects the logic of power, according to which there's always the need for a winner and a loser. Furthermore, he considers conflicts in such a way that the solution will never be zero-sum, but rather a solution in which all sides profit by it, and hence is accepted by it. To that end, he engages in the struggle using methods that do not threaten his opponent's vital interests. These solicit his good qualities, as well as appealing to the more open and sensitive groups within the opposite side. He uses methods of struggle that tend to humanize rather than dehumanize his opponent. Non-violence, therefore, is the channel through which meekness becomes strength and works differently from that of violence. A non-violent person rejects violence, but without having to withdraw from politics due to this. By his actions, he disproves the definition of politics as being the exclusive domain of the fox and the lion. So now, well, this, you know, for the believers, there's also the maxim of how the blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth in Matthew. So it is in this different sort of politics, which is imbued with this non-violence, meekness, where it is not passive non-violence, but it is active non-violence, or active non-violence of Gandhi. It is a very Gandhian Christian politics, devoid of its religious trappings. We are not doing theology, we are doing politics and constitutional politics. So devoid of the religious trappings, both Bobbio and Pontana meet in their epistemological, the original definition and idea of politics, and ontological, the actual and practical application of politics, the underpinnings of it. They both meet because they're seemingly disparate in terms of the definition of politics. As Bobbio pointed out, I don't want to go into the detailed quotations. So, on which Martin Luther King Jr. had said that Christ furnished the spirit and motivation, while Gandhi furnished the method. For this can have appeal both for a religious as well as a non-religious person, where one can confine to the method alone, the constitutional method, without going into because Gandhi himself was a very religious person. So we can read Gandhi both in his religious sense, but we can also read Gandhi in his constitutional sense. That's my attempt. So, and there was a German resistance and a spiritualist, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who wrote to his grandfather in 1934 that he wanted to go to India to study with Gandhi, because Christianity has become so westernized and so permeated by purely civilized or modern thought that we can see it is almost lost to us. Now, it is unfortunate that Bonhoeffer could never go to India because he was killed by the Nazi regime. I think Hans Mommsen has written on the Germans who were against the Nazi regime. So there were many who are less known or less spoken about. So on the meek constitutionalism as framed, the most important text in my view is by a contemporary Italian constitutionalist, Professor Gustavo Zagrebelsky, who wrote his Il diritto mite, the meek law, in 1992. So I would say that the meek law, as part of political process, was put in action by Gandhi from late 1890s in South Africa and thenceforth in India, and it reached its theoretical encapsulation in Zagrebelsky's Il diritto mite by the end of 20th century. So, and Professor Zagrebelsky writes that because he takes the debate between Bobbio and Pontara and takes it further. So he writes, the meek is the opposite of the arrogant, because unlike this, he does not have an exaggerated opinion of himself, being inclined to believe more in misery than in the greatness of man. He's not brave, that is, an arrogant who flaunts his arrogance. In the same way, even more so, he's not a bully, that is, an arrogant who takes action, having the means, pre-power. He's not even submissive, that is, one who renounces the struggle for weakness, for fear, for resignation. The meek, no, refuse the conflict for a sort of superiority over the goods that ignite the passions and the struggles between human beings to take possession of them. For this reason, his self-exclusion from the competition of life is not complaint, because he can only surrender once he has descended on the field of struggle. What the meek, in fact, does not do. The meek is not even a humble person, at least in the sense in which the word is associated with a depression of the spirit. The meek lives, in fact, not in sadness, but because he is totally at peace with himself. Finally, the meek cannot be mistaken for the modest. Modest is an underestimation of yourself, sincere or hypocritical. The reason, so to speak, structural, lies in the fact that modesty is a self-referential attitude, while meekness refers to others. Now, as a meek thing, Gandhi was the opposite of arrogance, with never an exaggerated view of himself. He was not brave in terms of flaunting his arrogance, enjoyed immense power and prestige, but was never a bully by the use of force on others. He was never submissive before brute force in fear, and his meekness was very real, as it was in reference to his fellow countrymen and fellow political leaders of the Indian freedom movement. The point of departure in Gandhi's political action of a mite from Zagrebelsky's conceptualization would be how Gandhi was very much part of the passions and struggles of his fellow human beings, without a sense of superiority. This might be due to Gandhi's avowed allegiance to the ancient Indian text, Srimad Bhagavad Gita, which exhorts action without a sense of attachment to the results or fruits of action. This is Gandhi's uniqueness and a break with empire, not just in a physical, but in an intellectual sense. Now, Zagrebelsky, commenting further on the debate between Bobbio and Pontara, because as he quote, this is Zagrebelsky speaking, I quote, the approach of Bobbio's essay seems to be following: strength is the virtue of politics. Gentleness, meekness, on the other hand, is a social virtue. Thus, politics and society are distinguished. The characters of one and the other can diverge even so radically from each other. Now, this is Bobbio's view of how of the functioning of society and politics. But Zagrebelsky questions it. Can we imagine a meek society under a violent government, or on the contrary, a violent society and a meek government, mild government? It seems to me that no, we can't. We cannot imagine this separation. Every form of government, that is, every form of exercising the political function, corresponds to a social substance. So if we want a democratic policy, we must also want a democratic society. If we want to impose a despotic government that is based on violence, society must be violent in turn. And there is an opposition between who is up and who is down, that there is pre-power in social relations. Form, which is politics, and substance, social, society, are closely linked. One feeds back into the other. An undemocratic society, like a society based on the exploitation of one party on the other, will produce undemocratic politics, even if the forms are democratic. For example, if there are parties, elections, associations, etc. I think many of the contemporary democracies, whether we like it or not, are facing this challenge with the rise in populism. And I quote further, and undemocratic politics will support the undemocratic features of society. It cannot be separated. So consequently, it seems to me a misleading error, that of many wise constitutional engineers who deal with rules but ignore, as if it had nothing to do with it, the social matter that would flow into these rules. In other words, social virtues such as vices are not widespread. If world history tells us that politics has never been meek, it is not because it cannot be, but because societies have been violent. It is the history of human relationships, be they political or social, that has always lacked those virtues that we collect under the name of meekness. Whoever wants to promote it effectively must operate both socially and politically. Thus, Zagrebelsky, I find, is with Pontara and with, and then, with Gandhian politics as it may, as against Bobbio, who distinguished politics from society, or the functioning of politics from society. Whereas they cannot be separated, for as history has shown us numerous times. Now this, we find that that the Gandhian active non-violence, meekness, but very alive, active political process is that he would reason, he would plead, he would appeal to the better judgment and the latent humanity of the ruling race. Race is not a good word because it's just a notion. Racism is a social fact, but anyway, this is an older writing. He would resist. He would never be a willing victim of racial arrogance. It was not so much a question of redeeming his own self-respect as that of his community, his country, even of humanity. Professor Gilbert Murray wrote as far back as in 1914, persons in power should be very careful how they deal with a man who cares nothing for sensual pleasure, nothing for riches, nothing for comfort or praise or promotion, but is simply determined to do what he believes to be right. He is a dangerous and uncomfortable enemy because his body, which you can always conquer, gives you so little purchase upon his soul. This Gandhian constitutional meekness can be explained in terms of Professor Jörg Luther, who wrote, meekness in law is not just sweet mildness or leniency opposed to the harshness of criminal law in the principle of lex meteor, but an aspiration or ideal of the entire legal order of a society grounded on a pluralism of principles that characterizes the spirit of the time. It serves as a picture taken from the world of virtues and beatitudes for the purpose to illustrate the world of the constitutional state, where the Constitution ideally builds unity and integrates law and politics. Meekness is a normative ideal of the Constitution that demands the maintenance of a pluralism of fundamental principles and values and a loyal confrontation among them in order to avoid any sort of absolutism. Constitutional meekness means for law and politics a general moral duty to promote coexistence, compromise, inclusiveness, moderation, interdependence, reasonableness, etc. This does not mean weakness, but supports a sovereignty of the Constitution with full submission of all political parties and leaders, and a duty to oppose all kinds of dictatorship, a convergence of all forces to a mobile center where balanced equilibria shall be realized. Now, I think we don't have, because I would like it also to be interactive, because I would have liked to speak a little bit on mercy, but you know, mercy, the one instance, I will just give one example of mercy, which Gandhi practiced. The constitutional legal mercy is when he justified this of an assisted killing for someone who is suffering of you know, of an ailment which has no cure, or someone who is in a vegetative state. Gandhi, in his writings, he is speaking of, so Gandhi is very far ahead of his times. This is a debate of today in bioethics of assisted suicide. And Gandhi, that's a mercy, mercy to the suffering. For Gandhi, it comes from his religious idea, but for a constitutionalist, it should come from a constitutional principle of freeing someone from extreme physical suffering, or someone who does not want to live in a vegetative state. That's one example of mercy. With this, I would close. I would open it for, close my speech. I would like to open it for questions or remarks or comments, if any. Thank you.
Excellent explanation. Thank you, Professor, again, to share with us the results of your research and the Gandhi's way of doing politics to change the realities of society. So now I give the floor to Professor Marcelo Figueiredo to give his remarks. Professor Marcelo?
I have a problem with my mouse here. Anyway, it's so rich.
There's a.
Sorry.
Hello. Yes. Now, they're so rich. The conference of Professor Kumar, that I think that maybe should be interesting to make a short comment in Portuguese and then in English, because there's so many things that he talk about. I think for our guests, I don't know if you want to just make it in English, or do you prefer that I make it some comments in Portuguese and then I can do it in English, as you wish, Jaqueline.
I think.
Professor.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. Yes.
Professor, if you can summarize it in Portuguese for our student listeners, it might be very helpful.
Okay, okay, okay.
And then if you do it in English, so
Okay,
that I
all right.
can also be part of
I'll
it.
try, yeah, I'll try to
Thank
do
you.
that. Anyway. Bom, o professor, como eu disse a vocês, o professor Kumar fez uma excelente palestra e, na verdade, ele recuperou toda a vida de Gandhi, não só no seu aspecto pessoal, filosófico, como também religioso, né? Então, eu vou tentar fazer um resumo da palestra dele, porque acho que foi muito rica para todos nós. Bom, ele conta a vida de Gandhi, como Gandhi, toda aquela história que nós conhecemos, que ele foi estudar na Inglaterra, voltou, depois os professores discriminavam ele na Inglaterra como indiano, não é? E ele foi superando, foi se tornando um dos melhores alunos da sala, e depois de se formar advogado, voltou para praticar primeiro na Índia, depois na África do Sul, e tornou-se um grande advogado, inclusive financeiramente muito prestigiado, um advogado conhecido na África do Sul, tinha honorários, recebia altos honorários, etc. E Gandhi, ele é conhecido pela sua filosofia, não é? Filosofia religiosa, filosofia política, e, na verdade, ele conta alguns aspectos da vida de Gandhi. Por exemplo, que Gandhi era um grande incentivador da arbitragem já naquela época, em 1910. Em vez de ele ficar ganhando dinheiro, os honorários dos seus clientes, ele, vamos dizer, incentivava que as disputas judiciais acabassem rapidamente por intermédio da arbitragem, o que fez dele um advogado muito conhecido, tanto na Índia como na África do Sul. E aí ele começa a contar as crenças de Gandhi. Quer dizer, Gandhi acreditava no cidadão, Gandhi acreditava no movimento de resistência pacífica, como nós sabemos, e Gandhi acreditava em enfraquecer o inimigo pela sua própria vergonha. Então, ele, durante 100 anos, fez esse trabalho com os britânicos no processo de colonização da Índia. Gandhi foi um grande resistente e conseguiu, com o tempo, vamos dizer assim, diminuir toda a arrogância britânica, fazendo com que as próprias regras britânicas na Índia fossem mitigadas e fossem adaptadas à realidade da Índia. Ele diz que Gandhi foi um grande líder, não é? E que só poderia ser comparado a Martin Luther King, por exemplo, ou a outros, como o Mandela na África do Sul, e que não há um outro Gandhi desde que ele nasceu, e enfim, né? E Gandhi também, vamos dizer assim, ele é conhecido pelo processo de convivência e de tolerância que ele tem. A Índia é um exemplo de várias nações, porque a Índia tem 40 diferentes línguas e idiomas e tem vários dialetos. Então, a Índia é conhecida pela sua diversidade, né? E o Gandhi exatamente respeitava essa diversidade e lutou contra o colonialismo britânico bravamente, não só judicialmente, nas cortes, nos tribunais, como também pessoalmente. E ele lembra uma série de movimentos, de massacres, de fazendeiros, contra colonos locais, e uma série de legislação repressiva da Inglaterra na época, e que Gandhi foi trabalhando contra isso, e que Gandhi tinha, vamos dizer assim, uma série de insights que hoje são conhecidos e que Gandhi já defendia, como a liberdade de imprensa, a não violência e a participação cidadã, o que nós conhecemos hoje como participação cidadã, como participação do cidadão contra todos os atos, vamos dizer assim, repressivos do Estado, não é? Gandhi já defendia isso há muito tempo. Defendia que as pessoas deveriam viver de uma forma não consumerista, ele era contra a sociedade consumerista e que ele era uma pessoa absolutamente frugal, quer dizer, ele vivia do que ele precisava comer, quer dizer, ele achava que o ser humano tinha que ser humilde e não consumerista, né? Também ele ressaltou aqui a liberdade de imprensa, a liberdade de associação e a liberdade das pessoas se movimentarem na sociedade, que eram direitos que não eram reconhecidos ao seu povo na época, né? E ele também desenvolveu muito a noção da dignidade do trabalho, né? A dignidade do trabalho era um conceito central para Gandhi, e aí ele conta toda vamos dizer assim, por que a importância da misericórdia, como ele fala, perdoar o inimigo, ou conviver com o inimigo, e também ele fala da suavidade, do meekness, né? A suavidade que no Brasil, o livro daquele jurista conhecido, Zagrebels, que é traduzido como direito dútil, né? No Brasil é considerado, a tradução que fizeram do italiano de miteza ou suavidade é direito dútil. Então, mais ou menos, ele explica o que Gandhi entende por suavidade, quer dizer, ele reprime qualquer movimento violento e defende que a política não pode ser violenta. Então, a política deve ser pacífica, né? E que Gandhi era também uma pessoa religiosa, mas ele sabia separar a religião da política, né? E ele achava que um dos grandes defeitos do ser humano é ser arrogante, como eram os britânicos na época, e diz que a grande virtude é ser suave, é ser compreensivo com o seu adversário. É que isso é muito importante. E basicamente é isso. Eu acho que não vou tentar resumir tudo aquilo que foi dito. Well, I think I did some kind of summary of your conference, and I have some, of course, your conference is very rich, and I thank you to your nice comments and nice remarks about Gandhi. We didn't know, of course, of so rich aspects of Gandhi's life, personal life, religion life, political life, as a philosopher, as a professor, as a great barrister, etc. We didn't know about all these details about Gandhi's life. It's very rich, your comments. I knew yesterday, making some research to ask you something about Gandhi, and they say that the framework of the Gandhi Constitution are inspired by Gandhi, and the first one was the Swaraj Constitution, and was drawn up by the delegation from Audi with inputs from Gandhi. And they say that's the two pillars of the Gandhi's constitutionalism. The first is no violence. And the second is decentralization. And I want to understand what exactly is this. No violence, it's quite clear for us because you explain it very well. I mean, all the movement of Gandhi for many years in India was exactly to show the British they are arrogant, they are violent, they are totalitarians, despite of this concept of the representation, the parliamentary regime, etc. But yes, we do understand that. But how can you explain this, the decentralization? How Gandhi's works and lessons gave us this notion of decentralization. Is decentralization of power? Is decentralization of federalism? Or what exactly is this?
So, as with so many other Gandhian ideas, he came up, of course, here he's a bit, this is another of his ideal projects of having village republics, where every village is self-sustaining. Now, with almost 500,000-600,000 villages, with those in India, he wanted all. Now we live in a world of nation states, and it was quite revolutionary in terms of its conception, but it wasn't in terms of the classical ideas of federalism as we understand. It was his idea of village republics, that every village should be self-sustaining with its own resources. And that's, I mean, if we need to have a very revolutionary take on stopping climate change, this can be the best possible option. But the thing is, as the world was structured, and he always knew that with a central power, if there's a big central power, if it's a Hegelian state, there will also be a concentration of power, even if it is a democratic state. And when there is concentration of power, there's a greater likelihood of its abuse on occasions, or the rights of citizens being trampled under its weight in its ordinary course of functioning. For if it's a very big, powerful state, in the ordinary course of its functioning also, citizens are railed against a big machinery, even legal machinery, constitutional machinery, which I quoted in through Zagrebelsky. He also writes this, that as we live, if it's a big, powerful state with more centralized power, there's naturally going to be with great concentration of power, there are chances that even if it's like if a very powerful person sneezes, it would be a thunderstorm. So if the state, a very powerful state sneezes, it will be a thunderstorm. Whereas if an ordinary individual sneezes, it would just be a sneeze.
We have this problem. We have this problem here in Latin America. We say that we have a huge power on the figure of the presidents. So the president, it's very powerful man, and we call it hyper-presidentialism. Hyper, it's super. It's a problem here. We have a huge problem. Yeah.
So when there is more concentration of power, even in democracies, then it has it can lead to some uncomfortable results. Like I would give an example of how when internal emergency was imposed in India in 1975 by Indira Gandhi, when civil liberties were curbed. Later on, of course, when elections were held in 77, the Congress party was routed, and she also lost elections. But the thing is, when there is, and especially in democracies, if it's a very populist or a very charismatic figure, and if the charismatic figure is a bit politically insecure or insecure in his or her personality, that can have damaging consequences for liberal democratic constitutional practice. But I think at the same time, if the democratic institutions are strong and firm enough, and that is in a classic Montesquieuian sense of legislature, executive, and judiciary, and free press, as I pointed out. Gandhi would not be Gandhi if there was no free press. British kept on muzzling the freedom of the press, but Gandhi, his autobiography was banned, and yet under clandestine ways it was both published and translated, and it became a blockbuster of its times. So we have to understand that freedom of the press is extremely important, and right to information. Now, recently, for European Union, 6 new fundamental rights are being framed, of which one is truth. And I was reminded of the Gandhian emphasis on truth, because truth, at least we should emphasize on fact, the factual truth. Like in terms of finances, in terms of budget, in terms of cost overruns, in terms of administrative and bureaucratic functioning. Being truthful, if it is done, and if truth is a fundamental right, which I think, because one can have varied understandings of truth. But facts.
Professor, this is very interesting, because we never take the truth as a right. In the Occidental Western vision, I never heard about on these terms that truth is a right. And Gandhi's view, it's very original on this point, because of course we talk today about transparency. We talk about the people need to know the budget and the real budget, the truth, etc., etc. So it's very interesting what you're saying, because especially for the students, because the truth it's an essential element of democracy. So it's very interesting, it's very nice. Eu estava dizendo, vocês entenderam, mas enfim, que a verdade é algo que eu esqueci de dizer aqui na fala dele. Ele ressaltou muito que o Gandhi, dos pontos da filosofia do Gandhi era a verdade, né? A verdade era um dos pontos essenciais para o que o Gandhi entendia como o fundamento de governo, fundamento de relacionamento, de relação política, filosófica, etc. Então, o direito à verdade é algo muito importante. Tudo para o Gandhi tinha que ter fundamento na verdade. Então, isso hoje é uma novidade, é algo muito importante para a gente dizer, porque eu estava dizendo ao professor que eu nunca vi isso escrito assim claramente nos manuais de direito constitucional, de direito administrativo, de filosofia política. Quer dizer, é algo muito interessante para ser estudado, inclusive pelos estudantes, para fazerem tese, o direito à verdade, né? Yes, I'm just talking in Portuguese what we just talked. Speaking.
Yes. That's very important, because it's crucial that everyone should understand.
Okay.
Because this is then linguistic hegemony.
Yes.
Of English. So we have to democratize this also.
Yeah, that's very nice. Jaqueline, acho que você pode aí abrir.
Well, I think because of the time, Professor Pratyush, if you want to give us some final remarks about your research.
Exactly now, in terms of these are in terms of the principles, and I'm very glad that I got some very good comments from Professor Figueiredo. I would because I am working on another one on Gandhian constitutional adjudication, where I would like to include, and it would be I would be glad if I get more questions and more feedback, because in terms of concretizing, because often when we talk of principles, it gets a bit lost in murk, especially in a common law framework. People are very case-centric, case law-centric, and not principles. Whereas without principles, there is nothing. Principles need to be well grounded. I mean, after all, the equity principle, even in common law system, it is that which led to so many principles, constitutional principles, become part of the legal setup. It wasn't just legislation. So I think there is that's where I'm. Otherwise, I'm very happy for having presented and for having been given the opportunity to present by Professor Mariana, and I got excellent moderation by Dr. Jaqueline, and Professor's remarks are excellent. But if there are other questions from other students or other listeners, I'm still, if we have time, we can still do it.
I think, Professor Pratyush, that you need to come back to answer the questions in another opportunity, maybe at University of Marília, not in these Zoom rooms, like not virtually. And now I give the floor to Professor Marcelo Figueiredo to give his final remarks, because we have to end the event on time.
Yeah.
Oh, of course.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. It's a wonderful opportunity to know and meet new friends and old friends. It's for me, it was a very good opportunity to learn about Gandhi's constitutional framework. Of course, we have the notion of the importance of Gandhi in the history of the humanity. Of course, we know some of his main philosophy, especially the non-violence movement, that it's very worldwide known. But I didn't know exactly all these details about Gandhi's life and how he could construe or make this construction in legal scientific doctrine, and also about the in common law and also in not common law in the other systems, that he could let's say make this construction about so many important concepts as truth, as no violence movement, as a philosopher. I didn't know that Gandhi was so important, including for, let's say, for the constitutionalism. We know this, the classics, no, but we never study also Gandhi's. We have to study more Gandhi. So this is very important for everybody, including for us from the South America professors to study more the Gandhi's view of no violence, of cohabitation, of toleration, of rights, of freedom, of press, everything that Professor Kumar today gave us the importance of Gandhi. So I'm very glad to participate on this debate and to learn, basically to learn something that I didn't know yesterday. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Please, Professor. I actually totally agree with Professor Marcelo. I think this is the importance of the research of Professor Pratyush, that he was very kindly actually to share with us. And maybe we can discuss this topic another time with more time and at University of Marília. So unfortunately, we have reached the end of this event. Thank you all for your time. And I hope to see Professor Pratyush and Professor Marcelo again. Like I said, next time, maybe at University of Marília. And so now I'm going to speak in Portuguese again to say goodbye to our audience. Bom, pessoal, nós chegamos, infelizmente, né, nós chegamos ao final do nosso evento. Eu acho que o grande resultado de hoje foi isso que o professor Marcelo falou, a gente descobrir e aprender novas perspectivas, novas formas de fazer política e como o estilo de vida do Gandhi influenciou a realidade da sociedade e mesmo a própria Constituição. Eu acho que fica aqui a oportunidade até para vocês estudarem, como o professor Marcelo disse, a verdade como direito, né? Então, agradeço a atenção de todos. Eu gostaria de lembrá-los que ainda hoje, às 18 horas, aqui no nosso canal, a gente tem um evento de metodologia que é coordenado pelo professor Carlos e pelo professor Walter, e certamente na próxima quarta-feira nós teremos mais um DDES com a presença da professora Mariana, que vai coordenar e dar andamento aos trabalhos com a excelência de sempre. Eu espero revê-los em breve e até mais. A gente vai encerrar agora a transmissão do YouTube e tchau, tchau, pessoal. Muito obrigada. Thank you, Professor